Yo guys, what is up? Max and our Path of Exile 2 video, and today we are going over our updated Cast on Shock Lightning Arrow Deadeye build. This is going to be specifically for the non-crit version of the build. I posted a crit version of the build the other day as I had been playing a ton of Cast on Crit Ice Shot, and I wanted to just import kind of our Lightning Arrow build into the Ice Shot Cast on Crit formula because it was working really well, and it turned out to be pretty insane. However, there's some definitely interesting things going on with non-crit in Lightning Arrow, and so I've spent about 12 hours just testing and building a bunch of things for our non-crit version, and I wanted to present that to you today and also kind of answer the question on which is better, the crit version or the non-crit version. So we're going to talk like upsides and downsides to going crit and non-crit, and then I'm actually going to have side-by-side boss comparisons to show you exactly how the builds stack up. And so to start, the main thing to talk about with non-crit is the fact that you can get Lightning Rod on non-crit Lightning Arrow builds, and Lightning Rod is incredibly powerful. This reads that lightning damage with your non-critical hits is lucky. What that means is anytime that we fire, we have a chance, we roll our damage twice and pick the better version. So for example, right now, if we look at my Lightning Arrow, I've got 46,000 DPS with it, and we're rolling anywhere from 4,997 lightning damage to 17,000 lightning damage. And so I have a very, very large range of damage that I can do, and every time that I shoot, I'm going to roll, technically with lucky, I roll that damage range twice and pick the higher value. There was some math done on this node because it exists in Path of Exile 1, and it nets out to about like 33 to 35% more damage for just like all of our lightning damage, which is a massive damage increase. And so that's kind of the big thing that you can do with Lightning Rod. Now, for our current skill tree, I did spec up to Wildstorm. I really wanted to get our lightning damage to be as much as possible and really focus on that. And with Wildstorm, this node is okay without the lucky hits, but if you pick Wildstorm and you've got lucky hits, now you've got a wider top end, and then you're going to get that top end damage a lot more often. And so that's kind of one thing that we've been doing on the like non-crit version, and we're able to scale up a ton of lightning damage, which feels pretty good. We can do bosses, we can do mapping, but how does it stack up to its crit brother? So this is two clips that I synced side by side. On the left side is going to be the crit version. On the right side is the non-crit version. Obviously, I've got different gear and stuff like that, but I tried to make them as similar as possible in terms of like kind of the power that we had on both. And I just kind of want to show this to you. Now, one thing to keep in mind is on the left is T3 like Zesht. And on the right is T4 Zest, so he had more health on T4. I don't know if he has more like damage reduction or resistances or whatever, but I don't think that should have played a factor. Basically, what I synced this up to is to them both having 21 million HP, which is what they had on T3. So on the left is crit, and on the right is non-crit. So at the end there, on the right side was right at about 21 million damage dealt, versus on the left side, you can see that we got to like right about 21 million damage. I think it just stayed just shy of 21 million. So as you can see on the crit version, we're doing about double damage. We are getting in that same time frame. Once again, I don't know how, if the boss is like more reses or whatnot, but we did about double damage on the crit version. And so why is that? So I think the big thing to understand is just how powerful like Eye of Winter is right now. Eye of Winter is a spell. I'm not using it right now, but it's a spell that gives us stacking flat crit chance, which allows us to get up to 100% crit chance on bosses. This is what we were using on the ice shot build, also using on the crit version, and we can get pretty comfortably like 400% crit multiplier, which is a massive damage increase for the build, versus on non-crit, the only thing that we're like really getting that's super big is non-crits are lucky, which is about a 35% more damage. So we've got like 400% more damage, or 35% more damage. And so I do think just straight up that the like non-crit version, if you're just talking about boss melts, is weaker. The non-crit version is just straight up weaker than the crit version for boss melts, but that doesn't mean that the like non-crit version can't do bosses. That we killed that T4 Zest, and we're melting like T16, T18 bosses, but it's just not quite as strong as the crit. And the other thing that I found super noticeable that I didn't even realize was a thing on the like non-crit version is I actually had to go and spec into freeze buildup. Now, one thing that allows us to do a bunch of damage while we're mobbing is Herald Device. Herald Device pops are massive. They deal a bunch of damage, and they allow us to one-shot packs. And on the non-crit version, I actually had to go and spec into freeze buildup because with freeze buildup, where I guess without it, we weren't getting Herald of Ice procs. And that wasn't the case on the non-crit version, because one thing to understand about proccing elemental ailments is they scale off of the damage that you deal. So for example, there's nodes like this Emboldened Avatar that give us more chance to freeze, more chance to shock, things like that. But at the same time, if you don't spec this and spec into like something that just does give you more raw damage, that more raw damage can also like equate to freeze buildup or shock buildup, because they scale your chance of doing one of those ailments scales off of the hit. And on the crit build, when we were critting, doing 400% more damage, I actually didn't need to spec into any freeze buildup because we were insta-freezing with all of our hits because we were doing so much damage. And so that's like another thing that I just really like noticed about speccing into the like crit version versus the non-crit, and one of the upsides. And so now I've kind of given some of the like downsides of the non-crit. What are the upsides? So I think one of the biggest things just outright that is massively beneficial to the non-crit build is there's way less stat pressure. For example, on the crit build, you need to get a high damage bow with crit chance, and it has to be high crit chance for it to work. You need crit multi. You need to get a bunch of crit chance and crit damage, which are both suffixes, where your suffixes on a non-crit quiver can go for attack speed plus levels of projectiles, dexterity, mana on kill. There's just so much less stat pressure, and it's a lot easier to scale like a bunch of stats on the non-crit version. For example, currently I've got 254 dexterity and 195 intelligence. All of those things are really nice because with the Hand of Wisdom in action, we're getting added lightning damage per intelligence and increased attack speed per dexterity. So I'm able to get a whole bunch more stats because the like suffix prefix or the suffix pressure is way less. And so I think just in general, gearing for non-crit is infinitely easier than it is for crit, because you need really specific things to get the crit chance or the crit build off the ground, whereas you can do a lot easier gearing on the non-crit version, and I found that really nice. The items are just more flexible. Now, one thing that is very important that I unfortunately just don't have for our like non-crit version is plus levels. If you are gonna go for the non-crit version, one of the best ways to scale your damage, because we don't have crit to scale off of, is just raw levels of your lightning arrow. And you can do that by getting a quiver that has +2 levels and then picking up a bunch of gems that have good like percentage increase to your quiver bonuses. You can turn that +2 levels into a massive more plus levels, get them into like +4 levels, and that's a really big way to scale up your damage. Every like +1 level is about 5% more damage. However, just currently for this build, to get like an upgraded quiver off of the one that I was using was about 22 divines, and so I did not spend that on this build. But if you are trying to really scale up your damage, getting plus levels of projectiles on your quiver, plus levels of projectiles on your amulet is another big way to scale up the damage of the non-crit version. All right, now let's go over our gem setups. So to start, we're using Orb of Storms with Chain, Font of Mana, and Unleash. I get asked about this quite a bit. Basically, this is just kind of to start our cascade of damage. You can set this down and just cast onto a boss. It'll instantly be proccing all of your lightning rods, but it'll create a bunch of shocks that will also be constantly sending out our orb or our ball lightnings. So this is kind of like to get the ball rolling, no pun intended, on our big like cascading damage. And so that's what we're using Orb of Storms for. And Font of Mana lets us generate mana when we're nearby it. So that's why we can kind of go in this and spam and get a little bit of mana. Like, you're still going to be spamming a bunch of mana, but it's a little bit of mana recovery, which is pretty nice. Then on our lightning arrow, sorry that's so loud, we've got Heft, Martial Tempo, Long Shot, Lightning Infusion, and Primal Armament. Now, you'll note that we're not using Lightning Infusion in our Herald device, and there's a few reasons for that. One, because we're scaling so much lightning damage, Lightning Infusion is massive damage for us. It is almost 10,000 damage increase just by using this. It massively increases all of our lightning damage. So that's why I'm using it in Lightning Arrow. And in order to proc our Herald device Cold Explosions, we mainly need Herald of Thunder to be doing big cold damage, because Herald of Thunder, if it's freezing things, will then proc Herald of Ice. And so we're actually fine with getting away without using the Lightning Infusion on Herald Device. We don't really need Herald Device to be shocking things. We don't have an issue with shock. What we do have some struggles with sometimes is getting things to freeze, and that's from Herald of Thunder. And so we can kind of safely use Lightning Infusion on our Lightning Arrow. We are using Voltaic Mark. This also gives us more chance to shock and an increased effect of our shock. This is a nice little damage multiplier. You could use Conductivity. We have pretty good Lightning Pen. Obviously, we could get a little bit more, but we're currently at 66% Lightning Pen, which is pretty good. We're about 10% off of where I'd ideally like to be. But with Voltaic Mark, we got Arcane Tempo, Coursing Currents, and Lightning Pen. On our Lightning Rod, we're using Close Combat, Scattershot, Concentrated Effect, Conduction, and Overcharge. These are some things that you can change around. Like, this is what you can use for mapping, but specifically for bossing. Like, if we're going to be doing like a T4 boss, like a Pinnacle T4 boss, I will put like Primal Armament and Lightning Infusion and Heft on Lightning Rod just to like really beef up its damage. This is plenty of damage for like map bosses, but you can, kind of significantly increase its damage. You still always want to keep Conduction, but for example, you can swap out like Close Combat and Overcharge, and now our Lightning Rod's doing a lot better with Primal Armament and Lightning Infusion. Just something that I wanted to point out. Let's swap these back. But yeah, for like mapping, this is more than enough damage to deal with bosses. On our Herald of Thunder, we've got Ice Bite, Lightning Mastery, Glaciation, and Cold Infusion. I get a lot of questions about, I'm not freezing with my like Lightning Arrow, or like, how are you proccing your Cold Explosion, stuff like that. The big thing to understand is we don't need our Lightning Arrow to freeze things, because our Lightning Arrow isn't freezing things. Right now, my Lightning Arrow is only dealing like 749 cold damage. That is not a lot. That's not enough to freeze. And that is fine. Even if we take off Lightning Infusion, it's still not going to freeze because we're on a non-crit build. But if our Herald of Thunder is dealing enough cold damage, that will freeze. And that's why we're building freeze off of. Our Herald of Thunder currently has like 3,776 cold damage. And when it procs, it's Ice Bite, and we get 35% of our damage is cold. That's just going to be like a huge magnitude for that cold damage. And with Glaciation, we're able to get Herald of Thunder constantly freezing things, which is really important for our Herald of Thunder. Ice Explosions. With this, we've got Innervate, Cold Pen, Cold Mastery, and Magnified Effect. We want this dealing a bunch of cold damage. Not as important for this to be shocking, because we will be shocking with our other attacks. And then on Wind Dancer, we've got Cannibalism, Blind, and Maim. Cast on Shock, I'm using Ball Lightning, Impetus, Inspiration for less costs. And then for mapping, I will use Freezing Mark. This gives us more freeze buildup on enemies, and it's automated, and it does cold novas. So this feels pretty good for mapping. For actual like bossing, we'll swap this Freezing Mark to Energy Retention, which will allow us to cast more Ball Lightnings, which is very, very nice. And then lastly, I'm using Ghost Dance with Fast Forward and Clarity. If you want more mapping survivability, you can swap this for Grim Feast. Grim Feast is also really good. I've just been using Ghost Dance because currently, anytime we get hit, we recover all of our energy shield, which helps for bosses. Grim Feast doesn't help for bosses at all, so that's why I'm using Ghost Dance. So this is post-recording the video. I just kind of wanted to give you guys an alternate skill tree that I think a lot of you are actually going to like a lot more. In the skill tree I'm about to present, I pathed all the way up to Wildstorm for the more max lightning damage. This is great. This is almost 10% more damage on the build, just going for this node, and you get all of this extra lightning damage, but it's pretty out of the way to get there. I think you could technically just anoint this. It is multiple divines to anoint this on your amulet, but I actually think this would be a really good anoint. But instead of pathing up to there, we can do an alternate route. We do lose blur, which is 4% movement speed loss. But if we come over here, we can get Step Like Mist, which is 4% movement speed. And then you can grab all of these things. So you get Essence of the Mountain. This helps a ton with Herald of Ice procs because you get extra cold and more freeze buildup. And then we can get Mindful Awareness. This gives us a ton of survivability. Now I'm at like 2,700 EHP on the build, which is gross. And then we get Flow Like Water for more attack and cast speed. And then we get Essence of the Storm for 5% of our damage is extra lightning damage and 30% increased chance to shock. Note that picking all of this up does technically still net me less just raw damage than Wildstorm. That's how powerful this node is. But there's a ton of quality of life to pick up here if you wanted to go this route rather than the skill tree I'm about to present to you. For the skill tree, I've changed this maybe 15 times today. There's a lot of things that I was messing around with. We were messing around with getting Sand in the Eyes. We were messing around with Giant Slayer. We were messing around with picking up Authority. So many different things. We went up and picked Spectral Ward. I actually ended up speccing into Thin Ice up here. Sorry, my camera's blocking it. We picked up Thin Ice. We picked up Heavy Frost. There were so many things that we messed around with. And this is kind of the skill tree that I ended up with that I'm pretty happy with. There's definitely some tweaks that you could do to it. But I'm very, very happy with how it came out. So some of the big things to note is the big downside, technically, on the non-crit build is you really need this node. Now, if you can technically anoint this node, and then you could basically skip all of this, and then go up here and grab a ton of things, and I think the build would be better for it, to be honest with you. The only issue with that is this costs about, like, 9 to 12 divines to anoint, which is disgusting, and so I would imagine that most of you don't want to do that, and so if you do have the money, you can anoint this, and then you can just basically go up to more of these top nodes up here, and there's a ton of cool things to grab. But just like normally, we're gonna have to path all the way over and grab this lightning rod. It is like 35% more damage for the build, which is huge. That's not reflected in your sheet DPS anywhere, obviously, but just note that it's very, very good. And then we can stack a bunch of intelligence on our way there, which actually works out pretty well. We are basically instacked just about every single where that we can get intelligence. Which is very, very nice for stacking up a bunch of extra damage. We pick up Flash Storm for shock chance. We've got pressure points. This is like 60% freeze buildup or something like that. It's huge. We've got our Jewel over here for attack speed, herald damage. I've got acceleration for more movement speed, skill speed, maiming strike for a bunch of hit damage. We've got Feathered Fletching for more projectile damage. I've got about 100% projectile speed, so it's about 100% damage for the build, which is really nice. We got all of your classic nodes here. I did slightly tweak this. Basically, if you go up and this way, you get Cat-like and a bunch of evasion, but it costs 1 extra skill point. I really just wanted blur, and I wanted that extra skill point back for like jewel slots. So I went this way for this specific build, we're getting a bunch of jewel slots. I did go and path to Subterfuge Mask. I've decided that technically with this build, we could go for Spectral Ward and Subterfuge Mask, or one or the other. I do think Subterfuge Mask as a node is a bit more valuable than Spectral. So I went for this. It gives us a bunch of evasion rating. This is currently giving me like almost 800 evasion rating from this single node, which is incredible for our survivability and our ability to dodge big hits. Over here, I've got my Against the Darkness Time Lost Diamond. If you don't have one of these, the skill tree really, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really think really changes. It did change in the old build, but we're not pathing to like a bunch of unnecessary things here. We're just picking up nodes that we normally would for Cold and Lightning Pen, Unbound Forces, and Kite Runner. This node is kind of disgusting because the projectile speed is another damage increase with Feathered Fletching. So this is like 30% increased damage on this one node right there. And then we pathed up to get Wildstorm for the more max lightning damage. Now let's talk about gear. I'm using a dual string bow. It is easier to get like a dual string bow without crit with a bunch of damage. Obviously, my bow isn't anything too insane, but it's got a bunch of damage. This one is currently about 387 DPS, and we've got some extra dexterity on it, which is always nice. On my helmet and like the rest of my gear is mostly the same. We're still going to be using a like Giga Energy Shield helmet. Remember that we're getting double the evasion rating on this from like whatever our base energy shield is. So big energy shield and big max life on this is very nice. I got some survivability. I will swap this for like a shittier helmet with a bunch of rarity find if I'm mapping, but that's just kind of like rarity find stuff. For our rings, same rings as before. I'm trying to mess around with using some of these big breach rings as like end game things. This one I've got 175 max life on, which feels great. It's got rarity, int, lightning res, and added fizz damage. The only thing about this ring versus my other one is I lose a little bit of chaos res, which I don't love. But on your rings, you're mainly looking for added damage. If you can get added fizz, added cold, added lightning, max life, rarity, int, and resistances are all very good. On your chest piece, I do recommend skipping out on max life to get a Giga Evasion chest piece. That can be really nice for acrobatics. It's kind of needed to get like crazy amounts of evasion. Hand of Wisdoms, I can show you real quick how much damage these add to the build. Right now we're at 45,000 damage on lightning. If we take them off, we lose about 15,000 damage. So these are a huge, huge, huge pickup for the build. If you don't have them, you are missing out. They are very expensive. I'd recommend trying to fix your resistances, your survivability, and everything before you purchase one of these, because obviously they inherently don't have any survivability on them. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get life. You're not going to get really any reses from these. So if you can buy one of these, I'd make sure that you are feeling good on your survivability first, and then pick one of them up for a bunch of damage. My belt kind of sucks. I do plan on picking up a headhunter here, but I just haven't yet because I'm lazy. On boots, once again, getting some rarity, some max life, resistances, and obviously big movement speed is great. And then on your quiver, you're really looking for, like, I would try to find double added damage, whether that's fizz, cold, lightning. Cold on this build is pretty necessary for the freeze buildup. I've got big cold on my ring and on my quiver, but getting cold damage, bow damage, projectile speed, fizz, all of those things in the prefixes, you're looking for big damage. And then the god tier prefixes or suffixes would technically be like attack speed plus levels of gems, and I'd probably get mana on kill, honestly, over dexterity. Dexterity is really nice, but like mana on kill gets multiplied by all of our quiver effects. So right now I'm getting like over 50 mana for every enemy I kill. So I literally do not have to touch my mana potions while I'm mapping, which feels so, so nice. If you can get a big mana roll on your quiver, that's part of the reason why I'm very partial to this one, as it just feels really, really good for mapping, especially with all of our quiver effects. And so that is our gear setup. All right, guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I know that I now have like played a few builds, and I definitely have my preferences. I do, for this specific kind of setup, I do enjoy the crit version more. I think it just feels more powerful, and I felt more confident on it. But that's not to say that you can't do crazy damage on a non-crit version of Lightning Arrow. Obviously, there is some incredibly juiced and crazy like setups out there doing crazy damage on non-crit Lightning Arrow. And so like it's not like you can't do crazy damage with either. I think Lightning Arrow Deadeye is probably one of the strongest builds in the entire game. So you really can't go wrong. But if you are willing to spend a little bit more for some crit gear, you can get some tons of damage. And if you don't want to do that, you can also get tons of damage on the like non-crit version. So yeah, guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. I will catch y'all in the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.